A shy girl confessed her feelings to a man she thought she'd never see again, but he returned in a limousine. "I know you're leaving, so if I don't say this now, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." "Are you sure? Because once I get on this bus, I won't be coming back." The gravel crunched beneath Betty Ross's boots as she stood at the edge of the bus station parking lot, her breath catching in her throat. The old bus idled in front of her, steam curling from its exhaust into the chill of the early mountain morning. She clutched her coat tighter around her, as if that could stop her heart from hammering against her ribs. Dr. Luke Bennett turned toward her, suitcase in one hand, the other still holding the strap of his messenger bag. His brown hair, always a little messy, moved gently in the breeze. His eyes, calm, steady, unreadable, were fixed on hers, waiting for her to say more, or take it back. But Betty didn't move. She had rehearsed the words 100 times in her mind during the past few weeks. She had stood in the hallway of the free clinic, watched him tend to patients with quiet patience, and memorized every tilt of his head, every soft encouragement he gave. She had watched him bandage the hand of a boy who fell off his bike, talk gently with a grandfather who refused medicine, and smile with warm restraint every time he passed her desk. And she had fallen in love with him, slowly, deeply, silently. Now, after 3 months of that, he was leaving. She took a shaky breath. "I know this is probably the worst time, and maybe I'll look back and wish I kept quiet, but I needed you to know I care about you." He didn't flinch, but he didn't smile either. "I have to go, Betty," he said, voice quiet, carrying more weight than she expected. "There's a life waiting for me on the other side of this mountain." "I know," she said, forcing a nod. "I'm not asking you to stay. I just didn't want you to leave without knowing." He looked at her then, really looked, eyes searching hers like he was trying to memorize them. His expression softened, and for a second she thought he might say something more, but instead he stepped forward, rested his hand briefly on her shoulder, and said, "Thank you." He turned away and climbed onto the bus. The door hissed shut behind him. Betty stood still, arms hanging loosely at her sides, her lungs refusing to breathe. The bus pulled away slowly, its engine echoing through the valley, and she watched it until it disappeared around the bend. Only when the sound had fully faded did she blink. Her hands were cold, her heart felt hollow. She turned and began walking back down the narrow path toward the town, every step heavier than the last. Back at her small home near the woods, her mother was sitting by the window, wrapped in a thick blanket. The house smelled faintly of eucalyptus and tea. Betty entered quietly, not expecting the tears that rose as soon as she saw her mother's gentle eyes. Her mother tilted her head. "Did you go?" Betty nodded. "Did you tell him?" Another nod. She swallowed hard. "Yes." Her mother reached out and patted her hand, her fingers fragile but full of comfort. "You're braver than I ever was, Betty." Betty knelt beside her and laid her head gently on her mother's lap. Her mother's hand stroked her hair, slow and loving. "I don't think he'll come back," Betty whispered. "That's not what matters," her mother said. "What matters is you didn't let him leave with your silence." Outside, the wind carried the faint smell of pine, and somewhere in the distance a bird called out into the morning. The world had moved on. But inside, in the little house on the edge of the town, a girl who had once been afraid of her own voice sat quietly with her mother, and for the first time in a long while, her heart was aching, but clear. 3 months earlier, the town had still been covered in early summer haze when Dr. Luke Bennett first arrived. Betty remembered the day clearly. She had been rearranging patient files at the front desk of the small free clinic when the door opened and in stepped a tall man in a navy shirt, sleeves rolled up, carrying a single duffel bag. His expression was polite but distant, the way people looked when they had been to too many places and still had not found a place to stay. "I'm Dr. Luke Bennett," he said, extending a hand. "Volunteer from the Urban Health Program." She remembered how cold her fingers felt against his warmth as she shook his hand. She had stumbled over her introduction, cheeks warm, and led him to the back room where she showed him the patient board, the medication log, and where the coffee machine often worked, but not always. He listened quietly, nodded often, and never once made her feel small. She had worked at the clinic for 4 years, and yet she had never seen a doctor settle in quite the way he did. Calm, observant, unhurried. In the weeks that followed, Betty found herself watching him in quiet awe. Luke treated the elderly with patience, children with gentle humor, and the skeptical with respect. He asked questions that mattered, not just about symptoms but about living conditions, families, and stories. One morning, a particularly difficult patient, a war veteran with chronic pain and a bad temper, began shouting in the hallway. Betty flinched, unsure whether to intervene. Before she could step in, Luke walked out of the exam room, put a hand gently on the man's shoulder, and said something she could not hear. But within minutes, the man was sitting quietly, head bowed, listening. Later, Luke found Betty in the supply closet, still shaken. He handed her a banana and a small bottle of orange juice. "Did you eat anything this morning?" he asked. She shook her head, embarrassed. "You're part of this clinic's immune system," he said. "Don't run it on fumes." From that day on, there was always a piece of fruit or a granola bar left on her desk in the mornings. She never saw him put it there, but she always knew. And then there was the day her mother collapsed at home. It had been a long week of bad air quality and cold nights, and her mother's coughing had worsened until it became a wheezing she could not ignore. Betty had called the clinic in a panic, and Luke had answered. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, he had said. He arrived with his bag slung over his shoulder, sat beside her mother on the couch, and spoke to her as if she were the most important patient he had ever seen. He listened. He examined her gently. Then he gave Betty clear, careful instructions and came back twice a day for the rest of the week. Her mother got better, slowly, steadily. "Your doctor friend," her mother had said one afternoon, her voice still hoarse. "He treats me like I'm not broken." Betty remembered that moment vividly. She had turned to the kitchen window to hide the look on her face. By the time Luke's second month passed, Betty realized something had changed inside her. She didn't just admire his work or appreciate his presence. She felt a quiet shift every time he smiled, every time he touched someone's shoulder with reassurance, or left a folded poncho on her chair after a rainy day shift. He was kindness, wrapped in silence, and that was what made her fall for him. Not because he noticed her right away or flirted or chased, but because he listened, because he stayed. And that, she had come to believe, was the rarest form of love. It was a night she had never forgotten. The storm had come in fast that evening, sweeping across the hills with thunder that shook the old tin roof of the clinic. Betty was alone at the front, reviewing the day's records by dim lamplight, when the power cut out entirely, plunging the building into darkness. She'd heard it before, the slow hum of the generator stuttering, the sharp click of silence when it finally failed. Then, the scream came. It echoed from room 3, high-pitched and raw. A woman's voice crying for help. Betty froze for a second, heart thudding. She grabbed the flashlight from her drawer and ran down the corridor, her pulse beating louder than the rain slamming the windows. Inside, she found a teenage boy seizing on the exam table, his mother clutching his hand, sobbing. The boy's limbs jerked violently, foam at the edge of his mouth. Betty panicked. She fumbled the drawer, searching for the emergency seizure medication. Her hands were shaking, the flashlight slipping between her arm and shoulder. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. "Betty," a calm voice said behind her. She turned to see Luke standing in the doorway, his silhouette backlit by the lightning flashing outside. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. He stepped into the room, took the flashlight from her, and with swift, practiced movements positioned the boy safely, cleared the airway, administered the medication, and spoke gently to the mother the entire time. Within minutes, the seizure subsided. The boy lay still, his breathing even. His mother clutched his hand and cried quietly. Betty backed into the corner of the room and slid down the wall, burying her face in her hands. Her breath came in short, uneven gasps. She had never felt so helpless. Luke knelt beside her. "Hey," he said gently. "It's over. He's stable now." I froze, she whispered, ashamed. No, he said. You ran toward the sound. You were scared, but you showed up. That matters. She looked at him then. Really looked. And something in his expression, calm, yes, but distant, told her that this wasn't the first time he'd watched someone tremble in the face of chaos. Later that night, after the storm passed and the boy had been taken home safely, Luke offered to walk her home. As they stepped through the wet grass, flashlights in hand, Betty gathered the courage to ask the question that had burned in her for weeks. Why did you leave the city? He was quiet for a long time. Only the sound of their footsteps and the chirping of frogs filled the silence. My brother, he finally said. He was 20, got hit by a drunk driver 3 blocks from my hospital. I was the one who got the call. I ran to the ER, got there in 5 minutes. He paused. I couldn't save him. Her breath caught. I was trained for everything. I'd seen 100 emergencies, but in that moment, I wasn't a doctor. I was just a brother who was too late. He looked up at the sky, where the storm clouds were finally breaking apart to reveal stars. I stayed for another year, tried to make it mean something, but everything I touched after that felt... So I left. Betty said nothing. Her throat was tight, her chest aching, not from pity, but from understanding. You came here to start over, she murmured. He nodded. I came here hoping that maybe helping someone else would help me too. At her doorstep, he hesitated. I don't talk about him much, he said. Thank you for telling me, she whispered. That night, as she lay awake, listening to the soft creak of the trees outside, Betty realized something. Luke hadn't just come to the town to offer his skills. He had come to remember how to be human again. And she, quiet, ordinary Betty, was beginning to see the cracks he tried so hard to hide. And through those cracks, something vulnerable and unspoken was blooming. Not just love, but healing. The days moved on, as they always did. But something in Betty did not. She returned to her routine at the clinic, organizing charts, checking inventory, reminding patients of their appointments. Everything looked the same from the outside. The same walls, same coffee mug on her desk, same faces walking in and out. But there was a stillness in her now, a quiet space where Luke used to be. She thought about him every day, not obsessively, not with the reckless ache of heartbreak, but with the quiet, persistent kind of missing that burrowed itself into the rhythm of daily life. She'd walk past room 3 and remember the night he saved that boy. She'd pass the side cabinet and remember the banana he used to leave for her. Sometimes she'd pause at the window and wonder where he was, if he was still helping people, if he ever thought of her too. They had never exchanged phone numbers. Luke didn't have social media. He had always said he preferred living in the moment. No noise, he called it. She used to admire that. Now, she hated it. There was no way to reach him, no breadcrumb trail, no thread of connection, digital or otherwise, just silence and memory. It was on one of those long, gray afternoons when the rain hit the windows in steady taps that her mother, sitting in her worn chair by the window, looked at her with a soft smile and said, "Whatever happened to that girl?" Betty looked up from her tea. What girl? The one who lit up every time the clinic door opened, the one who smiled even when her feet hurt, the one who laughed while folding towels. Betty swallowed, forcing a smile. She's just busy, Mama. No, her mother said gently. She's lonely. That night, Betty couldn't sleep. She sat by the small desk in her room, turned on the reading lamp, and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. She began to write. Dear Luke, the letter began. I don't know where you are or if you'll ever read this, but there are things I need to say, things I never said at the bus station because I was too afraid and too late. She told him about the days after he left, about the patients who still asked about the tall doctor with kind hands, about how she'd taken on more work, how she tried to distract herself but always found him in the quiet. She told him her mother had gotten stronger and that sometimes she sat up late asking about that gentle man who treated me like I was important. She told him about the nights she couldn't sleep, when she would imagine what he was doing and wonder if he ever missed the mountain air. She wrote until the ink smudged from her fingers. When she finished, she folded the letter, slid it into an envelope, and tucked it into the top drawer of her dresser. She never addressed it. She never mailed it. But the act of writing it, of pouring the ache into words, lifted something heavy off her chest, and though the letter stayed hidden in her drawer, she kept writing. Every week, another letter, a piece of herself, on paper. Reaching across the distance to someone she still believed might one day come back, not because she hoped, but because deep down she hadn't stopped believing in the power of being seen and remembered. It was a Thursday afternoon when the woman appeared. The clinic was quiet, the air filled with the usual scent of antiseptic and pine from the open windows. Betty was restocking the medical cabinet when the front door swung open. The click of expensive heels on linoleum echoed like something foreign. The woman was tall, poised, wearing a tailored beige coat that didn't belong in this mountain town. Her hair was perfect, her lipstick sharper than necessary, and her eyes scanned the room like she was looking at something to judge. "Hi," Betty said, setting the last bottle on the shelf. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for someone," the woman replied smoothly. "Dr. Luke Bennett." Betty's heart stopped. She stepped forward, carefully. "He's no longer here. He left months ago." The woman nodded, as if expecting the answer. Then she smiled, but not the kind of smile that held kindness. "I thought so," she said. "He told me this is where he'd been, wasting time." Betty's spine straightened. "I'm sorry. Who did you say you were?" The woman extended a perfectly manicured hand. "Caroline Whitmore. I'm his fiancée." The room tilted. Betty didn't take the hand. She couldn't. "I didn't know," she managed, barely above a whisper. "No, I imagine you didn't," Caroline said. "He tends to keep personal matters quiet, especially when he's off the grid." Betty swallowed, her fingers tightening around the edge of the reception desk. Caroline walked slowly around the room, heels clicking, eyes taking in every outdated piece of equipment, every framed community certificate on the wall. "This is sweet," she said. "Very rustic. Must be fulfilling, helping all these poor people." Betty didn't answer. Caroline turned, leaning slightly against the counter. "Listen, I understand what happened here. Luke always had a soft spot for people like you." "People like me?" Betty asked, her voice calm but cold. "You know," Caroline said lightly, waving a hand. "Small-town girls, sweet, simple, no real future beyond the county line. It's flattering, really. But you should understand, Luke has a life waiting, a legacy. His family is done tolerating his little detours." Betty blinked, her throat tightening. Caroline leaned in slightly. "So if you've been waiting for him, hoping he might come back, I'd suggest you let it go. Be realistic. Know your place." The bell over the door rang softly as Caroline walked out, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and something else, something colder. Betty stood frozen for several minutes before moving. She walked to the back office, opened the bottom drawer of the file cabinet, and pulled out the bundle of letters, dozens of them, folded, sealed, unsent. Each one held a piece of her heart. She sat at her desk, stared at them for a long while, then slowly tore them in half. Then again, until the words were unreadable, until her hands trembled and her cheeks were wet, and she could no longer tell if she was angry or just tired of believing in something she had no right to hope for. That night, she sat with her mother in the living room, the old lamp casting a dim circle of light between them. "Something happened today," her mother said gently, reading her face. Betty nodded. "I think I've been waiting for a shadow," she said. "It's time I did something real." Her mother reached over, squeezed her hand. "So do it. But don't let bitterness be the reason." A week later, Betty signed up for the Community Health Worker program. 2 nights a week, she sat in a classroom full of people like her, people trying to do more, learn more, be more. She began studying, volunteering for home visits, helping with educational outreach. And slowly, something shifted. She wasn't just filling her days to forget him. She was building something new. Not because Luke was gone, but because she was still here. And she was ready to stop living in the waiting. The rain had come slowly at first, soft, steady, like fingertips tapping against the tin roofs and dust-covered windows of the quiet mountain town. It had that gentle rhythm, the kind that lulls you into memory before you realize what you're remembering. By late afternoon, it had thickened into a curtain of silver, washing the streets in a cold, constant shimmer, making the world feel smaller, closer, almost suspended in time. Betty was in the back of the clinic, locking the supply room cabinet, her mind on little things, an expired box of gauze, a patient's follow-up form, the uneven hum of the old refrigerator, when she heard it. Not thunder, not the rain, but voices. Low murmurs at first, rising like wind before a storm. They weren't sharp or urgent, but collected, curious, like the hush of a crowd when something unexpected is unfolding. She stepped out of the room and moved down the narrow hallway, brushing damp hair from her forehead, frowning slightly. At the front windows, shapes moved in the mist. People, dozens of them, gathering with umbrellas in hand, forming a circle near the square. The colors of their coats and umbrellas bobbed against the gray sky like blooming petals in a monochrome painting. Something was happening. She pushed open the front door and stepped under the clinic's awning, blinking at the rain. That was when she saw it. The limousine, jet black, sleek, silent. Its polished body shimmered like glass under the rain, water trailing down its sides like silver threads. It rolled slowly down the gravel road, utterly out of place in a town with rusted pickups, dented mailboxes, and muddy boots. The tires barely made a sound as it came to a halt directly in front of the clinic. The crowd quieted further. For a moment, even the rain seemed to pause, caught between breaths. Then the door opened. Betty's lungs froze. Luke stepped out. He didn't emerge like a man trying to impress anyone. No designer suit, no entourage, just a simple white shirt with the sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms, a soft gray jacket loose on his shoulders, and dark boots now wet and scuffed at the toes. His hair was damp and slightly tousled from the rain, but his presence, solid, sure, was unmistakable. But it wasn't the way he looked that made Betty feel the world tilt beneath her. It was his expression, calm, unshaken, not nervous, not smug, just home. He scanned the small crowd, nodding gently at a few familiar faces. Then his eyes found hers. Everything else fell away. Betty couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Her hands hung loosely at her sides, but inside her chest, her heart beat so loudly she wondered if everyone could hear it. Luke smiled, slow, quiet, as if he knew exactly how much she needed it. And then, to everyone's surprise, he turned to the crowd and began to speak. "I spent years becoming a good doctor," he said, voice smooth but strong, rising just enough to be heard over the drizzle. "I worked in top hospitals. I treated hundreds of patients. I wore the white coat, followed the rules, carried the titles. I thought that was enough." The crowd stilled again. Betty stood rooted under the awning, eyes locked on him. "But the hardest thing I've ever done," Luke continued, his voice tightening slightly, "was leave this town and leave the one person who made me feel like more than what I did for a living." He took a slow step forward, the water splashing gently underfoot. "I came here to escape guilt I couldn't shake, to work hard, stay quiet, and somehow find peace." He paused, eyes resting on her again. "But then I met someone who reminded me that healing doesn't always come from saving others. Sometimes it comes from choosing to stay, from being brave enough to feel, brave enough to love, another step. I was a good doctor, but I was not brave enough to come back, to the place where I left my heart, until now." The crowd seemed to fade, umbrellas blurring into a mosaic of color. Betty couldn't hear anything but his voice, and in Luke's eyes, clear, steady, unwavering, she saw it all. Not a question, not an apology, but a man who had finally stopped running, and who had come back not for closure, but for her. The rain had thinned to a whisper by the time the crowd began to disperse, umbrellas folding like petals, footsteps fading into puddles. The square slowly returned to quiet, but Betty remained exactly where she stood, rooted to the wet pavement. Her dress clung slightly to her knees, damp from the mist. Her breath came shallow. Her hands were clenched at her sides, not in anger, but in a desperate attempt to hold herself together. Luke was only a few feet away now. His coat was soaked, water dripping from the hem, but he didn't seem to notice. His eyes, those same calm, knowing eyes, were fixed on her with a look that held a storm far deeper than the one that had passed overhead. He said nothing at first. He simply looked at her, like she was a memory he had been searching for and finally found in perfect clarity. His gaze swept gently across her face, pausing at the corner of her lips, the quiver in her chin, the unshed tears that turned her eyes to glass. It was as if he was memorizing her all over again, like he was afraid he might forget if he blinked. Then, without a word, he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small wooden box. It was weathered but polished by hand, worn smooth from being held too often, maybe too long. He held it out to her with both hands, as if offering something sacred. Slowly, reverently, he opened it. Inside was a silver ring. No diamond, no shimmer, just metal shaped with intention, and on the inside of the band, etched in clean, delicate letters, were 4 simple words. "You made me stay." Betty stared at it, stunned by the message. Her breath caught, and before she could stop it, a tear slipped down her cheek. Luke exhaled, voice soft but steady. "I didn't come here to make a grand gesture," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I didn't come to sweep in with declarations or drama." He took one small step closer. "I came back because I realized I never truly left." Betty tried to speak, but no sound came out. Her lips parted, her body tensed with emotion. But all she could do was look at him, at this man who had walked away from her once, and was now standing in the rain asking to be let in again. "I know I hurt you," Luke continued, quieter now. "I left without answers. I let silence grow where something beautiful had just begun. I thought I was protecting you, from my family, from my guilt, from everything I hadn't figured out about myself." He looked down for a moment, then back at her with unwavering honesty. "But then I remembered the quiet, the steady rhythm of this place, of you. You weren't part of the chaos. You were what made everything else fade away." He lifted the box slightly, the ring catching what little light the clouds allowed. "If I stay," he said, his voice trembling now, "not just for a summer, not just to make up for the past, but to build a future, do I still have a place with you?" Betty didn't move for several heartbeats. Then slowly, almost like a breath returning after being held too long, she stepped forward. She reached out, one hand wrapping gently around the box, the other rising to touch his cheek. Her fingers brushed away the last droplets of rain, her thumb resting softly beneath his eye. Her voice was barely audible. "The first time I told you how I felt," she whispered, "I did it because I was in love." She looked down at the ring, then back at him, her tears now falling freely, but not from pain. "But this time," she said, voice clearer, "I say yes, because I believe in you, in us, in second chances." A quiet sob escaped her lips, but it felt like release, like something long held back was finally free. Luke took the ring from the box with hands that trembled ever so slightly. He slid it onto her finger with the gentleness of someone handling something precious and fragile. And then, as if the world had narrowed down to just the two of them, he leaned in. He kissed her. It was not rushed, not performative. It was deep and reverent, a kiss filled with every word left unsaid, every day they had spent apart, every letter she had written and never mailed. It was a beginning, not an apology. The last of the rain lifted with the wind, and in that moment Betty felt something stir in her chest, not the flutter of first love, but the steady warmth of something stronger. He had returned, but more importantly, he had become the man worth waiting for, and she had been right to wait. The breeze that afternoon was soft, threaded with the scent of wildflowers and something sweeter, hope. It carried the laughter of children playing nearby, the murmur of friends reunited, and the kind of stillness that only comes from peace earned, not given. Sunlight filtered through the drooping branches of the old willow tree, casting dappled gold across rows of wooden chairs filled with neighbors, patients, and friends who had become family. It had been 1 year since Luke returned. 1 year since Betty had stood in the rain and said yes, not to a ring, not to an apology, but to a life they would build together, slow and steady. A life made not of grand gestures, but of everyday presence. A life rooted in something deeper than timing or perfection. Trust. Now beneath the willow tree where their paths had first truly crossed, they stood together on a small platform of hand-hewn cedar and stone. This was the place they'd once tended to sick children, passed out thermometers and bandages, reassured scared mothers, and learned to work side by side in quiet rhythm. It felt right to begin there forever here. Betty wore a simple lace dress, ivory, delicate, her sleeves brushing her wrists like a whisper. Her hair was half gathered, soft curls falling down her back, the way Luke once said made her look like a page from a poem. There were no diamonds, no veil, just a small flower tucked behind her ear. Luke stood across from her in a navy suit with no tie, sleeves rolled slightly at the cuffs. Tucked in his lapel was a single bloom, cut that morning from the tiny garden behind Betty's home. Her mother had grown it, like so many things in their lives, with patience and love. Just beyond the front row sat her mother, wrapped in a handmade blanket, a glint of pride in her eyes. Though time had slowed her movements and softened her voice, her spirit was still luminous. She watched her daughter with the kind of gaze only a mother has, part awe, part memory, part goodbye to the little girl who had once danced barefoot in the grass. As the ceremony reached its quiet center, the officiant paused for family blessings. Betty turned and walked toward her mother. She knelt beside the wheelchair, slipping her fingers into her mother's hand. Her mother squeezed back and, with a breath full of emotion, began to speak. "My sweet girl," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "You didn't choose the loudest man, or the richest, or the one with the grandest promise." Betty's throat tightened as her eyes shimmered. "You chose the one who didn't need to make you shine in front of the world," her mother continued, tears now running softly down her own cheeks. "You chose the one who made you shine quietly, inside, the one who gave you peace." Betty leaned in and pressed her lips gently to her mother's cheek, their fingers lingering together a moment longer before letting go. Then she turned back to Luke. When they faced each other again, there were no scripts, no memorized vows, just truth. Their voices didn't rise above the wind. They met it, matched it, with words that weren't just said but lived, words of forgiveness, of choosing each other again and again, of holding, not fixing, of listening, not saving. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, a hush of reverence fell for just a second, then warm applause rippled through the crowd like light on water. Laughter mixed with tears. A few dandelion seeds took flight in the breeze, drifting like blessings through the air. As they turned to walk down the aisle, hands tightly woven together, Luke leaned close, his breath brushing Betty's ear. "You once taught me how silence can heal," he whispered. "Now, I just want to spend the rest of my life learning how to hold on to you. Always." Betty smiled, not the kind of smile meant for pictures, but one that came from the very center of her being. And with that, they stepped forward, into the light, into love, into everything still waiting beneath the willow tree. And so, beneath the same willow where healing once began, Betty and Luke promised not just forever, but a life filled with quiet strength, shared purpose, and the kind of love that grows deeper with time. Their story reminds us, sometimes the most powerful love is not the one that sweeps you off your feet, but the one that stays, listens, and heals. If this story moved your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories, where we bring you unforgettable tales of hope, resilience, and the love that changes everything. We'll see you in the next story that stirs your soul.